On this week's episode of Shelf Appeal, we get the continuation of DC Rebirth, the Bat Family goes to boot camp, and orgies. Lots and lots of orgies. What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Shelf Appeal, the show where I go over what I've picked up for the week and give you a little bit of an idea as to whether it's something you should pick up too. To start off with, we're going to go over a couple independent books that I've been picking up in series and give you a brief rundown of what they're all about. While I was in my local comic book shop, I actually found that they had a copy of The Fix, the first printing of issue number 2. So this is an ongoing story by Nick Spencer. This did not get released this week. This was from last month. So what we got this month from Nick Spencer was this book. So this book is The Fix issue 3. So you can see a little bit of censorship there, and truth be told, this is a very mature book. It's for a mature reading audience. So it's one of those things where I would say it can be very enjoyable for people that are of a little bit more mature kind of nature, simply because it's got some very ongoing adult themes that happen in all over this book. There's mature written all over this book. Doesn't make it any less of a good story, but it's definitely something that you're going to have a certain particular taste going into it, and you might find yourself enjoying it even if you're not necessarily a fan of that particular genre, that particular style of storytelling, because Nick Spencer does a really good job. Then we go on to a tie-in that I'm really looking forward to, and that really surprised me, and that would be the Amazing Spider-Man Civil War tie-in. So Civil War 2, Amazing Spider-Man issue 1, and this finds Spider-Man taking Ulysses, the new Inhuman that's got the ability to predict the future, takes him under his wing for a night or two to try and figure out what kind of scope his powers really have. So this is a variant cover that I've got here. The regular cover is going to pop up in a graphic over there. And what I've found is that this book in particular, it's one of those interesting things about Spider-Man. Christos Gage is doing a very good job writing him. However, I'm not necessarily sure if this is the old Spider-Man, because he's taking some liberties that I don't necessarily think jive with Peter's morality 100%, because as we see it go through the book, Peter asks Ulysses, to try and figure out, if he's open to an opportunity that might utilize his powers in a slightly different dynamic, a slightly different way to help advance and save lives and things like that. But I'm not sure if it's like, it makes it very difficult for me, because I was like, okay, so using that kind of benefit, it gives me a very Back to the Future 2 kind of vibe as to how you'd want to be, using this thing and what kind of gain it is. And for Peter, I'm sure it's not personal, but it just brings into mind that kind of question. It's just like, if I was in that situation that Spider-Man's in, would I be making that same kind of proposition to Ulysses? So I'm really interested to see where the rest of this goes. So this brings me to another pickup of mine that is from a small ongoing series, and that would be Brutal Nature number 2. So Brutal Nature number 2 is an ongoing tale of a South American teenager kind of person that they've really got this ability, and they can wear these many masks, so to speak, that imbue them with powers, and it's here that we see the fight of the South American people as they're kind of encroached upon by conquistadors and people with their own mindsets. And this book actually, this issue got into some more consistently religious overtones that are very consistent with the time, but that might be a little bit off-putting for some people. Overall, I still think it's a really good story. And man, the art is just awesome. Like, the entire book is illustrated fantastically. Just for the visuals alone, it's a very good pickup. Next, we've got one book that I can't stop gushing about, and that is Renato Jones, The 1%, and this is issue number 2. And you can see right on the cover, you've got an overweight 1%er, so to speak, being choked out by his tie in a trail of urine that's kind of following him. And that really gives you an idea of where this book goes from moment number 1. This is another one of those mature books, like The Fix, but it's mature in a different way, because this is like, it's a tale of social injustice and corruption that's masquerading as a story of extreme violence and unrest in the soul of one individual that's speaking for, the masses. And ultimately there's some great dialogue to open up the book regarding, how much wealth is being held by the 1%. And as you move forward, you see this debaucherous lifestyle that these people that have the affluence to really, they've got the money to get these kind of things and they go into the worst possible places with it, like these unhealthy appetites, so to speak. And it's just like the absolute violence and blood boiling kind of oh god, man, I just can't even talk about it, because it's one of those things where when you see it and you understand what the premise is for the main character and who he's impersonating and what their desires are, it's just infuriating, and the response is immediately what you would do in an irrational kind of situation, which means that I love it. This is a great kind of live vicariously tale, and I think Carr Andrews is doing an absolutely fantastic job with it. I'm wondering how he's going to develop the story in a more complicated manner. So the violence and things like that, the basically primal outrage that you feel in this book can only go so far. So I'm interested to see where the story arc goes, and it looks like the side character Bliss should be kind of being, she could present that kind of foil, that bouncing ball for Renato Jones in this overall story arc. And I'm kind of interested to see where her character, who was raised in a similar situation and is from a similar nature, where she kind of fits into this whole thing. And that's what issue 2 really brings me to. And then the back page reveal of the cover and where the story's going in issue 3. But overall, I can't say enough about it. Carr Andrews absolutely crushing this thing, and it's pretty awesome. Then from Marvel's Icon imprint, we have Empress No. 3. So Empress No. 3 is written by Mark Millar, illustrated by Stuart Immonen, and this book is part of an ongoing series. This is a variant cover that I picked up. The stock cover is going to be on the graphic on the left-hand side. And what Empress does is it's a continuing tale of, she's an empress. She's a galactic ruler that is escaping from her domineering husband, who's just vicious and brutal and rules over the galaxy, this quadrant with an iron fist. And it's her story of trying to bring her children to a better lifestyle, giving them the opportunity to grow up happier than where they would have been. And ultimately, there's some undertones that come out of here in this issue regarding how this domineering king of the galaxy, so to speak, would treat his own kids. And you kind of understand the outlying, the underlying motivations. The big problem that I have, we're on issue 3. I think this is supposed to go for 7 issues, and we're not laying nearly enough groundwork for compelling story arcs for, these characters. There's not nearly enough backstory, so unless we're going to have a massive download over the next several issues, if this is only going to go for 7 before it's gone, I don't see them wrapping up any major story arcs very easily in the next 4 issues, and it might continue on to more books after that. So I'm going to have to see where this really kind of develops. Overall, it looks like it's a really good book. It's just I got to see where it's kind of going and get an idea of where we're headed down that road. Then we go to another one of my favorite books, and that is going to be The Vision No. 8. So The Vision No. 8 is written by Tom King, of course, and Tom King, this is such an offset, because if we're talking about the first 6 issues, very cohesive but confusing storyline. It brings you into a certain kind of mode when it comes to dealing with the Vision and the Vision family. And then in issue 7, when we go through the entire Vision Scarlet Witch love saga that he kind of reinterpreted and brought into his own kind of dynamic, what we run into is this book is now starting the last story arc, which is going to go from, issue 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 until he finishes the book. And what we saw at the end of issue 6 is the relaying of this kind of prophesizing of how things are going to conclude in the Vision. And the lead-off to this whole kind of, issue here is a character narration that is not from the Vision or any other member of the Vision family, and it's really an interpretation of that particular character and that particular character's story arc. And we see it, and you're like, man, this is actually a really happy story that's going on throughout this. And then you get a very good idea. You kind of had an inkling that it was going to go in this particular direction, but you get the last page reveal that tells you, well, shit. This is where it's going to go. things are going to get bad, and I can't wait till the fire, gets burning really hot when it comes to this, because the direction that Vision is taking, where he's going to go emotionally, what he's already compromised in terms of himself in his pursuit of protection for his family and his pursuit of more humanity. I'm very interested to see how this evolves. Next, we get into the new DC Rebirth titles for this week, and that would be starting with Aquaman #1. So Aquaman Rebirth #1, this is written by Dan Abnett, and this book is, well, it's interesting because it's not really, it's the first Arthur Curry tale that I really proactively tried to get into regarding Aquaman himself. And what Dan Abnett does is, through a narration, he gives you an impression that he understands where Aquaman sits in terms of the pop culture social landscape. He pokes fun at every kind of trope that we poke fun at Aquaman for, and then he tries to give validation for his personality characteristics and really draws a very compelling caricature. He builds and he's like, no, this is the purpose of the character, and he fills you in on why this character can be and should be so compelling. And it's a very kind of, throwaway conflict and things like that helps move the plot along with some action paces, but really it comes down to the undertones of the actual story itself. The art itself in the book is very good, but the story arc and the narration and how that evolves is what's very important. And we come to realize at the end that there's a very different reasoning for this narration, and it gives it purpose for where the story arc is going to go. While Dan Abnett did a very good job in giving me a reason to care about Arthur Curry and a reason to care about Aquaman, I really need to read more of this ongoing story arc to get an idea of whether it's something that I'm going to stick around with or not. Next, we have our warrior goddess, so that would be Wonder Woman in Rebirth issue #1. And Wonder Woman, which is written by Greg Rucka, is an inherently confusing book. From the start to the finish, it is extremely confusing, and I think that it's intended to be confusing the entirety of the way through, because what's happened to Wonder Woman over her span in DC Comics is she has had several different origin stories, and the reason that she's gone to the world of man, or how she's gotten there, they've been rewritten and basically re-examined multiple times, and it's always been a little bit different, and it's always been a little bit confusing. So it's just like, okay, so is she Amazonian? Is she a god? Is she, where is she at in her life? And ultimately, where is she at coming from this New 52 universe into the Rebirth universe, and how has the Rebirth New 52 reveal impacted her over that time? What parts did they keep? What parts did they take away? How much does she remember? How much does she think she remembers? And that's what's kind of compelling about this story, because if Greg Rucka is going to go back and he's going to clarify and write the definitive origin story for Wonder Woman going forward, I want to see that. I want to see how she takes this path, because it becomes more like an archaeological or like a detective kind of story, because she's trying to piece together these things and uncover a lie of her origin and her life and how those things are moving forward. She goes so far as to, lasso of truth herself to kind of figure out where those things are going. So props to Greg Rucka for taking a book that is inherently confusing in how its dialogue is strung out and how its narration is strung out, and making it something that I want to read next issue. Then what we get from DC is the literal and I believe spiritual successor to the DC Universe Rebirth #1, and that is Flash Rebirth #1. And the reason that Flash Rebirth #1, written by Joshua Williamson, is the successor to this whole thing is because it actually picks up from where the most heartfelt part of the story in DC Rebirth left off. So we see Barry Allen, and then all of a sudden, immediately, Barry Allen is beset by these various visions, and then we pick up, we move through the story in that respect. We pick up with Wally West becoming Solid, getting pulled out of the Speed Force. Spoilers for anybody that hasn't read it yet. And then immediately, we've got the CSI of Barry Allen going to the Dark Knight Detective to try and piece together where, it's like, oh, this button that I found in the wall after the lightning struck it, which kind of proves a hypothesis that the lightning carried the button into the actual wall itself. So it was a part of the Speed Force relaying these clues so that way they could piece together the solution for the overall DC Rebirth concept. And I feel like this is the book that everybody kind of wanted out of the Batman Rebirth title. They wanted a continuation of that storyline. They wanted more information on the Joker. They wanted more information on DC Rebirth. And what we got was Joshua Williamson taking that ball and kind of running with it, so to speak, in The Flash. And yeah, no, it's become a pickup book for me for, the foreseeable future as this kind of situation unfolds. And, I'm interested to see where Barry goes, where Wally goes. It should be a fun ride because Flash books are always some of the brightest inside the DC universe. And seeing them come to the light, I feel like having the Flash family, which is, Jeff Johns is a really big fan of the Flash family. Having the Flash family kind of lead that way in terms of brightness and bringing back the new Superman is definitely a great way to move forward with DC. Then in something that's not a new number one, we have Action Comics 957. So Action Comics 957, which is written by Dan Jurgens, is another Superman tale. And what we run into with Action Comics 957 is, while Wonder Woman is the most confusing book in terms of its writing, Action Comics has become the most confusing book in terms of its storyline. And if you read the book, you'll understand exactly what I'm saying, simply because the way that these things are unfolding inside this DC Rebirth universe, which is technically a continuation of the New 52, we have the death of Superman, the arrival of, Earth 2 previous universe kind of Superman, and then we have Lex Luthor taking over the mantle of Superman, and then all of a sudden, this other guy pops up, and you're like, where the hell did he come from? And the last page is a direct cover swipe of a classic title that happened pre a whole bunch of stuff. So it's one of those things where you're like, how many pieces, like what sets of the Lego, it's like, which Lego play sets are they playing with, and how many of the same Superman figure are going to be in this universe moving forward, and how big of a part of that is that going to play in the Superman universe? Because with Dan Jurgens writing this title, and then Peter J. Tomasi writing the main Superman title, it's going to be interesting to see how all those things kind of tie in, and if they tie in, or if this is going to be a Dan Jurgens specific run that's going to go through Action Comics alone. And that brings up a whole lot of questions. It kind of makes me not want to read it, to be perfectly honest with you, simply because it's just, I know that it's going someplace. I don't necessarily know if I care where it's going because of how those kind of things are unfolding. I'm going to give it some shots. This is a story arc kind of a book that I'm going to pick up, so I'm going to pick up the first 5 or 6 issues to see where we kind of take that intention. But ultimately, it feels very convoluted in a way that it doesn't really need to be. But I'm going to let him take me on a ride, man. That's how it's supposed to work. I'm going to let him take me on a ride. And finally, in another one of the not quite Rebirth, but Rebirth titles, we have Detective Comics 934. So Detective Comics 934, this is a variant cover. The original cover is fantastic too, but I like the variant cover because it's black and stark and it feels more like the Dark Knight. And in Detective Comics 934, we see the Bat family kind of come together under one banner, and you see a revelation, a reveal from Bruce Wayne and the actual knowing of the character that he's revealing to. It's just like, yeah, I was just waiting for you to admit it. It's just like it took you this long to come clean with me, and he's just like, oh, okay, well, cool, let's do this. Let's make this work. So we see a situation where evidently there's something going on in Gotham that Batman himself cannot handle. We bring in Batwoman, and then we also bring in Tim Drake's Red Robin, and then we bring in Spoiler, and then we bring in Orphan, and then we bring in Clayface, and all of a sudden you have this Bat family team that doesn't even include, like Damian Wayne, and it doesn't include Dick Grayson as Nightwing. It doesn't include, even these major players in the overall Bat family. You still got Red Hood out there kicking it and doing what he does, which is pretty off kilter. So this sees Batman understand the need for help and trying to create a more capable set of people inside Gotham to help combat this kind of issue. And the last page on it kind of gives you an idea that this is a previous historical kind of person that most likely has very intimate ties with Batman himself because of how they've modeled their attack on Gotham. So I'm very interested to see where this goes. I mean, from the guy that wrote Batman and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which I've got all 6 issues of that, I am really stoked what Mr. Tinian IV has done with Detective Comics. And for a book that I didn't really think that I was going to be reading all that much, He's definitely got me interested to at least see where this first story arc goes, and I'm considerably a little bit more stoked on this book than I was on the Action Comics. Not by much, but it's definitely going to be one of those that I'm going to continue to pick up. It's one of those things where I think you should give it a shot, because it's going to, if you're a Batman fan, you're definitely going to pick it up. If you're not a Batman fan, it's going to introduce you to some new characters that you may not have been really familiar with, and you might get to like them. So that's always a good thing. That's it for this week's episode of Shuffle Peel. If you like what you see, hit the like button down below. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more news regarding comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.